It all starts with a map, or rather the empty spaces on one. Imagine France in the 1500s. It's a kingdom full of new ideas, but also, well, feeling a bit left out. Its neighbors, Spain and Portugal, are splitting up the new world, bringing back tons of gold and silver. The French king, Francis I, looked at this and thought, we need a piece of that. It wasn't just about wanting more, though that was definitely part of it. It was about being important, about not being left behind in a world that was changing fast. The reason was a strong mix of God, glory, and gold. So the first French ships set sail. They were small wooden boats, creaking and groaning as they went into the huge, unknown Atlantic Ocean. The first real prize was North America. In the early 1600s, Samuel de Champlain sailed up the St. Lawrence River and started Quebec. This wasn't just a place to trade, it was the center of a new French area, a huge piece of land they called New France. It was an empire built not on gold mines, but on something else just as valuable: fur. The trade of beaver fur became the main moneymaker for the colony, creating a special relationship between French trappers, known as coureurs des bois, and the Native American people. French missionaries, the Jesuits, traveled deep into the wild, trying to convert Native American groups but also writing down their languages and customs. It was a world of deep forests, long winters, and a constant back and forth between different cultures. Men like René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de la Salle, went on huge trips, canoeing down the entire length of the Mississippi River. In 1682, he claimed the whole river area for France, naming it Louisiana in honor of King Louis XIV. But it was a weak empire. The huge size of New France was also its biggest problem. There were never enough French settlers to truly control and develop the land. While the British colonies on the Atlantic coast were growing fast in people and money power, New France stayed a huge, wild, and empty area. While New France was about fur and forests, France's Caribbean adventure was about something much sweeter and much more cruel: sugar. Islands like Saint-Domingue, which is Haiti today, Martinique and Guadeloupe, became the money-making powerhouses of the First French Empire. This wealth, however, was built on a foundation of unbelievable human suffering. The farm economy depended completely on the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of Africans were captured, crammed into the awful bottoms of slave ships, and brought across the Atlantic to work in the cane fields. Life on the farms was short and brutal. The work was back-breaking. The conditions were terrible. For a time, Saint-Domingue was the single most profitable colony on Earth, making more sugar and coffee than all the British West Indies put together. That powder keg finally exploded in 1791. Inspired by the French Revolution's own calls for liberty, equality, brotherhood, the enslaved people of Saint-Domingue rose up in a massive rebellion, led by people like Toussaint Louverture. What followed was a long and bloody fight, the Haitian Revolution, the only successful large-scale slave revolt in history. In 1804, Haiti declared its independence, a shocking blow to France, and a sign of hope for enslaved people everywhere. France had lost its most valuable colony. It was a powerful lesson. Empires built on such extreme unfairness often carry the seeds of their own destruction. After the shame of losing its American lands and the gem of Haiti, France's plans for empire quieted down for a while. But in the 1800s, they came roaring back to life, this time focusing on Africa. The new chapter began in 1830 with the invasion of Algiers. What started as a punishment trip to get back at a diplomatic insult turned into a full-blown takeover. By the late 1800s, the scramble for Africa was in full swing. European powers were frantically dividing up the continent, and France was leading the way. Driven by a mix of national pride, money interests, and a belief in its mission civilisatrice, its civilizing mission, France pushed inland from its coastal outposts. They created French West Africa and French Equatorial Africa, a giant block of land stretching from the Sahara Desert to the Congo Basin. It was an empire bigger than the whole United States. The civilizing mission was the reason they gave for this conquest. The French told themselves and the world that they were bringing progress, medicine, education, and enlightenment to Africa. But this was always about control. The real goal was to use Africa's resources, peanuts, cotton, rubber, wood, and to make sure French goods had a market there. Colonial rule was enforced with a strong hand. African societies were broken apart. Traditional leaders were replaced with French-appointed chiefs, and local people were often forced to work and pay high taxes. Resistance was constant, from small acts of defiance to large armed uprisings, but they were almost always crushed by the stronger military power of the French. By 1914, France had built a second empire, one centered in Africa, that was even larger than the one it had lost. France's imperial view also looked east, towards Asia. The adventure here started with missionaries and traders in the 1600s, but it was in the mid-1800s that the taking over truly began. Using the excuse of protecting Catholic missionaries, French forces attacked Vietnam, slowly taking control of the country. Over the next few decades, they spread their power, conquering Cambodia and Laos. By 1887, these areas were officially combined into the Union of Indochina. It was a rich and important colony, a French foothold in a region mostly controlled by the British and the Dutch. French Indochina was a major source of wealth, mainly from its huge rubber farms and its exports of rice. The Michelin Tire Company, for example, owned huge rubber estates where Vietnamese workers toiled in terrible conditions. Just like in Africa, the French said their rule was justified by a civilizing mission, building colonial cities like Saigon, which became known as the Paris of the Orient. Beyond Indochina, France spread its influence across the huge Pacific Ocean. It was a different kind of colonization, one of islands and small landforms rather than huge landmasses. Starting in the 1840s, France took control of Tahiti and the islands around it, creating French Polynesia. They later took over New Caledonia, a large island rich in nickel. Life in these Pacific colonies changed a lot after the French arrived. Traditional ways of governing were broken down, and the local economy was changed to serve French needs. From the rice fields of Vietnam to the lagoons of Polynesia, France had created a varied, sprawling, and very complex Asian-Pacific empire, one that would eventually rise up to demand its freedom. Life in the French Empire was a story of two completely different realities existing side by side. For the French settlers, administrators, soldiers, and merchants, it could be a life of special treatment and chances. In cities like Algiers, Dakar, or Saigon, they created little French areas. They lived in grand houses, shopped in French-style stores, and relaxed in exclusive clubs and cafes. They had access to the best housing, education, and healthcare. For them, the colony was a place of power, importance, and money advantages, a world where they were automatically at the top of the social ladder. For the vast majority, the people who were colonized, life was another matter entirely. Their existence was shaped by the colonial system. Many were forced off their old lands to make room for European farms or settlements. They were often made to do forced labor, known as the corvée, to build the roads, railways, and public buildings that served the colonial government. The French tried a policy of assimilation, the idea that colonized people could, in theory, become French if they learned French language, culture, and values. A small number of locals, the évolués, did reach this status, getting better jobs and some social mobility. But assimilation was always more of a promise than a reality. Despite the harsh treatment, life went on. Local cultures didn't just disappear. They changed, fought back, and survived. People continued to speak their languages, practice their religions, and cook their traditional foods, often mixing them with French influences. This cultural strength was a quiet but powerful way of fighting back, a refusal to be erased. The French Empire, for all its power, was never a peaceful place. From the very beginning, people fought against it. In Algeria, the Emir Abdelkader led a smart guerrilla war against the French for over 15 years. In Vietnam, educated officials led rebellions to try and kick out the foreign invaders. These uprisings were almost always defeated by France's better military tools, but they showed that the empire would always be challenged. The way people fought back started to change in the early 1900s. A new group of leaders came forward, many of whom had been taught in French schools. They had read Rousseau and Voltaire and had truly believed in the French ideas of liberty, equality, brotherhood. Instead of just fighting on the battlefield, they started to fight with ideas. They formed political groups, published newspapers, and organized strikes and protests. The First World War was a major turning point. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers from the colonies were brought to Europe to fight and die for France in the trenches of the Western Front. When these soldiers returned home, they brought with them a new confidence and a new understanding of politics. They had fought for France's freedom. Now they began to demand freedom for their own countries. People like Ho Chi Minh in Indochina and Habib Bourguiba in Tunisia began to build modern movements for their country's freedom, demanding not just changes, but complete independence. The demand for freedom was becoming a roar that could no longer be ignored. The Second World War dealt the final blow to the French Empire. France's quick defeat by Germany in 1940 shattered its reputation. Suddenly, the all-powerful colonial master looked weak and easy to attack. This split, along with the Japanese taking over Indochina, further weakened France's hold. Right after the war, the fight for independence exploded. In 1945, Ho Chi Minh declared Vietnam's independence, starting the First Indochina War. It was a brutal 8-year conflict that ended in a humiliating defeat for the French at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954. This loss was a huge shock. Morocco and Tunisia successfully got their independence in 1956. By the late 1950s, the process of colonies gaining freedom was speeding up across French West Africa and Equatorial Africa, with most territories becoming independent peacefully around 1960. The message was heard across the empire. The most painful and violent end came in Algeria. Because of its large settler population and its status as a part of France, Paris was determined to hold on. The result was the Algerian War, from 1954 to 1962, a savage conflict marked by terrorism, torture, and immense bloodshed on both sides. In the end, Charles de Gaulle, who had returned to power, realized that there was no military solution. He made the difficult decision to grant Algeria independence in 1962. With the loss of Algeria, the great French Empire was effectively over. What remained was a scattering of islands and territories from French Guiana in South America to New Caledonia in the Pacific, which chose to remain part of France with different levels of self-rule. The grand Imperial project, which had started with such big plans 4 centuries earlier, had come to a dramatic and often violent end. The age of empire was over, but its lasting effects were only just beginning to be understood. The French Empire may be gone from the map, but its ghost is everywhere. You can see it in the streets of Paris, Marseille, and Lyon, where millions of French citizens have family roots in Africa, the Caribbean, and Asia. People moving from the former colonies has greatly changed French society, creating a diverse, multicultural nation, but also bringing challenges of fitting in, identity, and racism. The most obvious lasting effect is language. French is still an official language in dozens of countries, from Senegal to Quebec, from Switzerland to Vanuatu. The Vietnamese banh mi sandwich, served in a French baguette, or the North African couscous, now a popular dish in France, are tasty symbols of this complex mix of cultures. The economic and political lasting effect is just as deep. Many former colonies keep close and sometimes difficult relationships with France. France continues to have a lot of political and military influence in Africa, a relationship often called neo-colonialism. The borders of many African nations, drawn by Europeans in Berlin with no thought for ethnic or cultural differences, continue to be a source of instability and conflict even today. In France, there is a difficult and often painful discussion about this history. Was it a glorious civilizing mission, or a brutal system of taking advantage of people? The truth, of course, is that it was both, a story of huge complexity and contradictions. For the formerly colonized peoples, the legacy is one of independence won through struggle, but also of the deep scars left by foreign control. The story of the French Empire is a reminder of how big plans can build worlds, and how the demand for freedom can make them fall apart, leaving echoes that last for centuries.